The rain was coming down hard that Thursday evening, making little rivers along the empty school hallways. David Collins was in his classroom, erasing the whiteboard and stacking the colorful worksheets his second graders had completed that day. At 28 years old, he'd been teaching at Riverside Elementary for 3 years now, and every single day felt like a battle between his love for the job and his struggling bank account. His phone buzzed with another notification. He didn't need to check it to know what it was. The rent reminder, again. He was already 2 weeks late, and Mrs. Patterson, his landlord, wasn't exactly known for her patience. David sighed and shoved the phone back in his pocket. He'd figure it out somehow. He always did. Just as he was about to grab his worn-out jacket from the back of his chair, he heard something. A sound so faint he almost missed it over the drumming of rain against the windows. Was that crying? David paused, tilting his head to listen. Yes, definitely crying. A child crying. He quickly walked out of his classroom and down the corridor, his old sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. The sound was coming from outside. David pushed open the heavy doors leading to the playground and immediately felt the cold rain hit his face. The playground was supposed to be empty by now. The school buses had left almost an hour ago, and the after-school program had ended 30 minutes back. There, on the swings, sat a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. Her small frame was hunched over. Her backpack clutched tightly against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her safe. She was crying softly, and she was absolutely soaked from the rain. David's heart squeezed in his chest. He jogged over to her, already shrugging off his jacket even though it was the only warm thing he owned and he'd need it for his walk home since his car had died last week. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said gently, crouching down beside the swing so he wouldn't tower over her. "Are you okay? Where's your family?" The little girl looked up and David could see her red, puffy eyes and tear-streaked cheeks. She had dark hair that stuck to her face from the rain, and she was wearing what looked like a very expensive school uniform. David recognized her vaguely from the halls, but she wasn't in his class. I missed my bus," she stammered between sobs. "And I can't call my daddy. My phone died and I don't remember his number and nobody's here," and fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. David felt that familiar ache in his chest, the one that reminded him exactly why he became a teacher despite the terrible pay and the constant stress about money. Okay, it's all right," David said softly, draping his jacket over her small shoulders. "You're not alone anymore. I'm Mr. Collins and I'm a teacher here. We're going to figure this out together, okay? But first let's get you out of this rain." He gently guided her toward the covered area near the school entrance where at least they'd be protected from the downpour. The little girl followed him, still clutching her backpack, her small body shivering. Once they were under the roof, David knelt down again to be at her eye level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily," she whispered. "Lily Harrison. That's a beautiful name. Okay, Lily, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to use my phone to call the school office and we'll find your dad's number in their emergency contacts. How does that sound?" Lily nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. David pulled out his phone and dialed the office. No answer. Right. Everyone had gone home already. He tried the principal's cell phone, voicemail. He left a quick message explaining the situation. David looked at Lily's worried face and made a decision. "Tell you what, the grown-ups might take a little while to answer, but that's okay. We'll wait right here where it's dry. Are you cold?" Lily nodded again. David noticed she was shivering pretty badly. His jacket helped, but it wasn't enough. The little girl looked so small and scared, and something about her reminded him of himself at that age. Different circumstances maybe, but that same feeling of being lost and alone. "I'm a little hungry," Lily said quietly, almost like she was afraid to admit it. David reached into his bag and pulled out the granola bar he'd been saving for his own dinner. It was the last one he had until payday, which was still 3 days away. But looking at this little girl's face, he didn't even hesitate. "Here you go," he said, handing it to her with a smile. "It's not fancy, but it'll help." Lily took it carefully and unwrapped it, taking small bites. "Thank you, Mr. Collins. You're very welcome. So Lily, while we wait, why don't you tell me about your day? Did you learn anything cool at school today?" As Lily started talking about her math lesson, David kept trying different numbers. He finally got through to the assistant principal, who promised to track down Lily's father's contact information and call him right away. Relief washed over David. At least now they were getting somewhere. But the minutes ticked by. 10 minutes became 20. 20 became 40. David tried to keep Lily distracted. He pulled out a notebook from his bag and started folding paper into origami shapes. First a crane, then a frog, then a butterfly. Lily watched with wide eyes, her tears finally stopping. "How do you do that?" she asked, a hint of wonder in her voice. "My mom taught me when I was about your age. We didn't have much money for toys, so she learned how to make things from paper."
"Want me to teach you?"
Lily nodded enthusiastically. For the next 20 minutes, David patiently showed her how to fold a simple paper boat. Her small fingers struggled with the creases, but she was determined. When she finally held up her slightly lopsided boat, her face lit up with the biggest smile David had seen since finding her. "I did it," she exclaimed. "You sure did. You're a natural. Here, you can keep this one I made too." As they sat there on the cold concrete waiting, Lily started opening up more. Maybe it was because David didn't feel like a stranger anymore, or maybe she just needed someone to talk to. "My mommy died," Lily said suddenly, her voice very small. 6 months ago. David felt his heart break a little. "I'm so sorry, Lily, that must be really hard. Daddy's really sad now. He works all the time. He's always at his big building with lots of people. Sometimes I don't see him for days. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, she's nice, but..." Lily trailed off, staring at her paper boat. "But she's not Daddy," David swallowed hard. He understood loss. His own father had left when he was young, and his mother had worked herself to exhaustion trying to provide for them. He knew what it felt like to be a kid who just wanted their parent to be there. "You know what?" David said gently. "I bet your daddy loves you very, very much. Sometimes when grown-ups are sad, they forget how to show it the right way. But that doesn't mean the love isn't there. Do you think so?" Lily asked, looking up at him with hopeful eyes. "I know so. And you know what else? He's going to be so happy to see you. He's probably really worried right now." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the rain continue to pour down. David checked his phone again. Still no call back. He tried the assistant principal again. No answer. He was starting to get worried himself, but he didn't let it show on his face. "Mr. Collins?" Lily asked. "Why are you still here? Don't you have to go home?" David smiled. "Well, I couldn't just leave you here alone, could I? That wouldn't be right. But don't you have family waiting? Or a girlfriend?" David chuckled. "No girlfriend. And my mom lives in another state. It's just me in my apartment. Well, me and a lot of unpaid bills." He said the last part mostly to himself, but Lily caught it. "What are unpaid bills?" "Oh, it's just grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about, kiddo." "Are you poor?" Lily asked with the innocent bluntness only a child could manage. David wasn't offended. He appreciated her honesty. "Yeah, I guess I am. Teachers don't make a lot of money. But that's okay. I still get to do something I love every day." "If you don't make a lot of money, why did you become a teacher?" It was a question David had been asked 100 times by his friends, his family, even his ex-girlfriend who'd left him because she couldn't deal with his financial situation. But somehow explaining it to the 7-year-old felt different. "You want to know a secret?" David asked. Lily nodded eagerly. "When I was your age, maybe a little older, something scary happened. My mom was working late and I got locked out of our apartment. I didn't know what to do. I was sitting outside our building crying, just like you were crying today. And my teacher, Mr. Washington, he was driving by and saw me. He stopped, stayed with me for hours until my mom got home. He bought me dinner, helped me with my homework, made me feel safe. And I remember thinking, when I grow up, I want to be like him. I want to help kids who need someone." Lily was quiet for a moment, processing this. "So you help kids like me?" "I try to help all kids. Every single one of you deserves someone who cares. Someone who'll stay late on a rainy day to make sure you're okay. Money can't buy that feeling, you know? The feeling when a student finally understands something they've been struggling with, or when they smile after a bad day, or when they tell you about their dreams. That's worth more than any paycheck." "You're really nice, Mr. Collins," Lily said softly. Before David could respond, headlights suddenly illuminated the covered area where they sat. A sleek black car pulled up, the kind of car David had only seen in magazines. The back door flew open, and a man in an expensive suit practically jumped out, not even caring that he was stepping right into a puddle. "Lily," the man shouted, his voice filled with panic and relief. "Lily, oh thank God." "Daddy!" Lily jumped up and ran to him, and the man swept her up in his arms, holding her tight. David stood up slowly, grabbing his soaked jacket from where it had fallen off Lily's shoulders. The man was tall, probably in his early 40s, with dark hair that was now getting wet from the rain. He held Lily close, and David could see his hands shaking. After a long moment, he set her down gently and turned to David with eyes that were suspiciously bright. "You're the teacher who stayed with her?" the man asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, sir. I'm David Collins. I teach second grade here. I found Lily on the playground about an hour and a half ago. She'd missed her bus." The man ran a hand through his hair, looking devastated. "An hour and a half. My daughter was alone for an hour and a half because I—" He stopped, seeming to collect himself. "I'm James Harrison. I don't know how to thank you enough. The school called my office, but I was in a meeting. My assistant finally tracked me down. If you hadn't been here, if you hadn't stayed with her—" His voice cracked. David shook his head. "Anyone would have done the same thing, Mr. Harrison. I'm just glad Lily's safe now." "That's all that matters." James looked at David more closely, taking in his worn sneakers, his old clothes, his soaked-through shirt now that he'd given Lily his jacket. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. "Please, let me give you something. For your time, for taking care of my daughter, for—" "No," David said firmly but politely. "Thank you, but no. I wasn't doing this for money, Mr. Harrison. I was just doing what any decent person should do." James stared at him like he'd just spoken a foreign language. "But surely, it's okay. I'm just happy Lily's going home safe with her dad. That's all the thanks I need." James looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Finally, he nodded slowly. "At least tell me your full name, which grade you teach. I want to send a letter to your principal about this." David gave him the information, though he felt a bit embarrassed. He hadn't done anything special, not really. He'd just stayed with a scared kid. That's what teachers did. As James helped Lily into the car, the little girl turned back and waved. "Bye, Mr. Collins. Thank you for the paper boat." David waved back, smiling. "Anytime, Lily, you take care, okay?" As the expensive car drove away, David stood there in the rain for a moment. His stomach growled, reminding him that he'd just given away his dinner. His wet shirt clung to his skin, and he had a long, cold walk home ahead of him. Tomorrow he'd have to figure out how to come up with rent money, and the day after that, he'd need to find a way to get to school without a car. But right now, none of that mattered as much as knowing that little girl was safe and going home to her father. David picked up his bag, pulled his thin jacket tight around himself, and started the long walk home through the rain. He didn't know it yet, but that one simple act of kindness, that decision to stay with a crying child on a rainy evening, was about to change his life in ways he could never have imagined. Sometimes the smallest moments lead to the biggest changes. And sometimes doing the right thing when nobody's watching is exactly what the universe needs to see. 3 days had passed since that rainy evening, and David was in his classroom during lunch break, eating a peanut butter sandwich he'd made from the last bit of bread in his apartment. His stomach had been growling all morning, but he tried to ignore it. Payday was tomorrow, and then he could finally buy groceries. And maybe, just maybe, he'd have enough left over to pay at least part of his rent. He was grading papers when there was a knock on his classroom door. The principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, stood there with a smile on her face that made David slightly nervous. She only smiled like that when something unusual was happening. "David, do you have a minute?" she asked. "Of course." David set down his red pen and walked over to her. "I got a very interesting phone call this morning," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her eyes twinkling. "From a Mr. James Harrison. He wanted to tell me about what you did last Thursday evening. Staying with his daughter, taking care of her for nearly 2 hours, giving her your jacket and your food." David felt his cheeks warm up. "Oh, that. It really wasn't anything special, Mrs. Rodriguez. I just couldn't leave a kid alone in the rain." "Well, Mr. Harrison seems to think it was very special indeed. He was quite emotional on the phone, actually. He wanted me to know that you went above and beyond." She paused, studying David's face. "He also mentioned that you refused any payment or reward." "I was just doing my job," David said simply. "Well, technically staying after hours isn't my job, but you know what I mean. It's just the right thing to do." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded slowly. "That's exactly why you're one of our best teachers, David. Not everyone would have done what you did." She patted his shoulder and turned to leave, then stopped. "Oh, and David? Mr. Harrison asked if he could have your email address. He wanted to send you a proper thank you. I hope you don't mind that I gave it to him." No, that's fine, David said, though he felt a bit awkward about it. He didn't need thanks. He'd just helped a kid. That evening, as David sat in his small apartment eating instant ramen for dinner, his laptop pinged with a new email. He almost ignored it, thinking it was probably another bill reminder, but curiosity got the better of him. The email was from James Harrison. David opened it and started reading. Dear Mr. Collins, I've been trying to find the right words to thank you for 3 days now, and I'm still not sure these words are adequate. What you did for my daughter Lily last Thursday was more than just keeping her safe. You gave her comfort when she was scared. You made her laugh when she was crying. You treated her with kindness and dignity, asking for nothing in return. In my world, people rarely do anything without expecting something back. You've reminded me that good people still exist. My daughter hasn't stopped talking about you. She tells me about the paper animals you made, about how you shared your food with her, about how you stayed even though you were cold and wet. She says you told her that helping kids is worth more than any paycheck. I want you to know that your kindness meant everything to both of us. If there's ever anything I can do for you, please don't hesitate to reach out. With deepest gratitude, James Harrison. David read the email twice, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. It was nice to be appreciated, sure, but something about the email made him sad. The way James wrote about people rarely doing things without expecting something back. The formal tone, even while expressing gratitude. It reminded David that Lily had mentioned her father worked all the time, that she barely saw him. He thought about typing a response, but he was too tired. Tomorrow, he decided. He'd respond tomorrow. The next week brought an unexpected development. David was cleaning up his classroom after school when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Hello? Mr. Collins? This is James Harrison. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Oh, Mr. Harrison, no, not at all. I got your email. I'm sorry I didn't respond yet. It's been a busy week. Please call me James, and I completely understand. Actually, I was calling to ask you something, and please feel free to say no if this is inappropriate. James paused, and David could hear the nervousness in his voice. Lily has been asking about you constantly, and I've been thinking about what you said to her that night about how you help kids. The thing is, Lily's been struggling since her mother passed away. She's seeing a therapist, which helps, but she doesn't really have many people in her life who just listen to her. Talk to her like a person, not like a tragedy. David felt his chest tighten. He could hear the pain in James's voice, the guilt. The worry of a father who was trying his best but didn't know if his best was enough. I was wondering, James continued, if you might consider tutoring Lily a couple of evenings a week. Not because she needs academic help, she's actually doing very well in school, but because she needs someone like you in her life. Someone who cares, who has time for her. I would pay you well, of course. Whatever your rate is, I'll double it. David's first instinct was to say no. He didn't want to take money from this man who was clearly going through his own grief. It felt wrong somehow, like he'd be taking advantage, but then he thought about Lily's face that rainy evening, how scared and alone she'd looked, and he thought about his own empty bank account, the rent he'd barely managed to scrape together, the fact that he'd been living on rice and beans for 2 weeks. James, David said carefully, I appreciate the offer, and I'd be happy to spend time with Lily, but I don't want you to feel like you have to pay extra. I have a standard tutoring rate, $25 an hour. That's what I charge everyone, and that's all I'll accept. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then James said quietly, $25 an hour. That's what you charge? Yes, sir. Mr. Collins, David, I was prepared to pay you $200 an hour. You're telling me you'll only take 25? That's my rate, David said firmly. I don't charge people based on how much money they have. Everyone gets the same rate. It wouldn't be fair otherwise. Another long pause. You're a very unusual person, David. All right, $25 an hour it is. When can you start? They arranged for David to come by twice a week, Tuesday and Thursday evenings. James gave him the address, and when David looked it up later that night, his eyes went wide. The Harrison house was in the wealthiest neighborhood in the city, the kind of place where David had never set foot in his entire life. That first Tuesday, David took 2 buses to get to the Harrison residence because his car was still broken and he couldn't afford to fix it. When he finally arrived at the address, he stood outside the gate for a full minute, just staring. It wasn't a house. It was a mansion. the kind of place you see in movies. 3 stories tall, perfectly manicured lawn, a fountain in the front yard, an actual fountain. David pressed the intercom button, feeling completely out of place in his worn jeans and his jacket with the broken zipper. "Hello?" came a woman's voice. "Hi, I'm David Collins. I'm here to tutor Lily?" The gate swung open smoothly and David walked up the long driveway, his old backpack slung over his shoulder. Before he even reached the front door, it opened and Lily came running out. "Mr. Collins." "You came, you really came." David laughed as Lily grabbed his hand. "Of course I came. I promised, didn't I?" James appeared in the doorway, still in his work suit, though he'd loosened his tie. He looked exhausted, like he'd been running on coffee and stress for months, which David suspected he probably had been. "David, thank you for coming. Please come in." David stepped into the house and tried not to gawk. The entryway alone was bigger than his entire apartment. There was a crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling, marble floors, a sweeping staircase that looked like something out of a fairy tale. He felt like he'd stepped into a different world. "Daddy, can Mr. Collins and I work in the library?" Lily asked, bouncing on her toes. "Of course, sweetheart. Whatever you want." James turned to David. "Can I get you anything? Coffee, water, something to eat?" "Water would be great, thank you." As Lily dragged him toward what she called the library, which turned out to be an actual room filled with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, David couldn't help but notice how quiet the house was, how empty it felt despite being so big. This was a house, he realized, but it didn't feel like a home. Not anymore. Not since Lily's mother had died. They settled at a large desk and Lily pulled out her homework. For the next hour, they worked on math problems and reading comprehension. But David also made sure to ask Lily about her day, about her friends, about the things she liked and didn't like. He learned that she loved drawing but was too shy to show anyone her pictures. He learned that she was scared of the dark but didn't want to tell her father because she thought it would make him more sad. He learned that her favorite food was pancakes because her mom used to make them every Sunday morning. "We don't have pancakes anymore," Lily said quietly, her pencil hovering over her math worksheet. "Daddy doesn't know how to make them, and Mrs. Chen, our housekeeper, she makes really good food but not pancakes. Would you like to learn how to make them yourself?" David asked. "They're not that hard. Maybe we could ask your dad if we could use the kitchen sometime." Lily's eyes lit up. "Really? You'd teach me?" "Sure, I make pancakes all the time. They're cheap and filling, which makes them perfect for teachers who don't make much money," he added with a grin. Lily giggled, then got serious again. "Mr. Collins, can I ask you something?" "Anything. That night when you found me, you said your teacher helped you when you were sad. Were you sad because you were poor?" David thought about how to answer this. He believed in being honest with kids, but he also didn't want to scare her or make her worry about things she couldn't control. "I was sad for a lot of reasons," he said carefully. "My dad left when I was little and my mom had to work really hard to take care of us. We didn't have much money, which meant sometimes we struggled. But you know what? The money part wasn't what made me saddest. What made me sad was feeling alone, feeling like nobody had time for me because everyone was too busy or too worried about other things. Like how I feel sometimes," Lily whispered. "With Daddy?" David's heart broke a little. "Does your dad know you feel that way?" Lily shook her head. "I don't want to make him more sad. He's already so sad about Mommy. Can I tell you something I learned when I was growing up?" David said gently. "Sometimes the people who love us need to know when we're hurting, even if we're worried about making them more sad, because they can't help us if they don't know something's wrong. Your dad loves you so much, Lily. I could see it in his eyes that night. He was so scared when he couldn't find you. But he's always working." "I know, and I bet if he knew how much you missed him, how much you needed him, he'd want to change that. Adults sometimes forget what's really important. We get caught up in work and bills and all the grown-up stuff, and we forget that the people we love need us just to be there." They worked on homework for a while longer, but David could tell Lily was thinking about what he'd said. When James appeared at the library door an hour later checking on them, David saw how Lily's face lit up just from seeing her father. And he saw how James's expression softened when he looked at his daughter, even though there was so much sadness there too. After the session ended and David was getting ready to leave, James walked him to the door. "Thank you," James said quietly. "I haven't seen her this happy in months. Whatever you're doing, it's working." "I'm not doing anything special," David said. "I'm just listening to her. treating her like a person whose feelings matter. That's all kids really want, you know? Someone to see them. James was quiet for a moment. The school told me you walk to work most days. That your car broke down. David felt his face flush. It's not that bad. Just a couple miles. In this neighborhood? It's at least 3 miles to the nearest bus stop. And it's getting cold. James pulled out his wallet again and David immediately shook his head. James, no. We talked about this. I'm not trying to pay you extra, James said quickly. I'm trying to help. You're helping my daughter, helping my family. Please let me call you a car service to take you home. David wanted to refuse. His pride was screaming at him to refuse. But it was cold outside and it was dark and he was tired. So tired of struggling, of barely making it, of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Okay, he said finally. Thank you. That's very kind. James made a quick call and within minutes a car pulled up. Not the fancy one from that rainy evening, but a normal car service. As David rode home, watching the wealthy neighborhood give way to his own struggling part of town, he thought about Lily and James. About how money couldn't buy happiness, couldn't fix grief, couldn't replace what they'd lost. He also thought about how strange it was that he, someone who could barely afford groceries, was being asked to help a family that had everything money could buy. But that was the thing, wasn't it? They didn't have everything. They had money, sure. They had a huge house and nice cars and probably more things than David could even imagine. But what they needed most, what Lily needed most, wasn't something money could buy. She needed time, attention, someone to see her pain and sit with her in it. Someone to teach her how to make paper boats and promise to show her how to make pancakes. Someone to listen when she talked about missing her mom. And James, David was beginning to realize, needed help too. He was drowning in his grief and his guilt, working himself to death trying to provide for a daughter who didn't need more things. She just needed her dad. Over the next few weeks, David came to the Harrison house twice a week like clockwork. He and Lily did homework, but they also drew pictures together. They read books. They talked about everything and nothing. David told her stories about his students, about funny things that happened at school. Lily told him about her mom, about memories she was scared she might forget. Sometimes I can't remember what her voice sounded like, Lily confessed one evening, tears in her eyes. And that scares me so much. That's normal, David said gently. Our memories of people change over time, and that's okay. It doesn't mean you love her any less. It doesn't mean she's really gone. She's still here in the way you laugh, in the kind person you are, in the things she taught you. David also started noticing things about James. How he'd come home later and later each evening, sometimes after David had already left. How he'd appear at the library door with dark circles under his eyes and coffee stains on his expensive shirts. How he'd look at Lily with such love and such pain, like he didn't know how to be both a good father and a grieving husband at the same time. One Thursday evening, David stayed a few minutes late because Lily wanted to finish the drawing she was working on. James came home while David was still there, which was unusual. James looked surprised to see him. Sorry, we ran a bit over, David said. Lily was really into her artwork. She's got a lot of talent, by the way. James smiled tiredly. She gets that from her mother. Rachel was an artist, painted the most beautiful things. His smile faded. I should probably take down her paintings. Maybe it would hurt less if I wasn't seeing them every day. Or maybe it would hurt more, David said quietly. Maybe Lily needs to see them. Needs to be reminded that her mom existed, that she was real and talented and loved. James looked at him sharply. You sound like you know something about loss. My dad left when I was 6. Different situation, I know. But I remember my mom taking down all his pictures, packing away everything that reminded her of him. She thought she was protecting me, but all it did was make me feel like he never existed at all, like that part of my life was just erased. James was quiet for a long moment. I don't know how to do this, he finally said, his voice rough. How to be enough for her. How to be what Rachel was. How to work and provide and also be there. I feel like I'm failing at everything. Can I be honest with you? David asked. When James nodded, David continued. Lily doesn't need you to be her mother. She needs you to be her father. She doesn't need you to work more. She needs you to be home more. I know you're trying to provide for her, to make sure she has everything. But James, she doesn't need things. She needs you. James's eyes were bright with unshed tears. She told you she feels alone? Not in those words. But yes, God. James sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs. I'm destroying the one good thing I have left, aren't I? No, David said firmly. You're grieving. You're struggling. But you're not destroyed, and neither is your relationship with Lily. It's not too late. It's never too late to change. They talked for a while longer. David sharing what he'd learned from his own childhood, from watching his mother figure out how to balance work and parenting, from his years as a teacher seeing what kids really needed from the adults in their lives. When David finally left that night, taking the car service James had insisted on providing for all his trips, he felt like something had shifted. Like maybe, just maybe, he'd said something that would make a difference. He didn't realize just how much of a difference it would make, or how much his own life was about to change because of a simple choice to stay late on a rainy evening with a crying little girl who just needed someone to care. Something changed in James. Harrison, after that conversation, David noticed it the very next week when he arrived for his Tuesday evening session with Lily. James's car was already in the driveway, which was unusual. It was only 5:30 and James rarely got home before 8. When David rang the doorbell, James himself answered, and he wasn't wearing his usual suit. He had on jeans and a casual button-down shirt, and he looked less exhausted than he had in weeks. "David, come in," James said, and there was something different in his voice, something lighter. "Lily's been waiting for you. She's in the kitchen, actually." "The kitchen?" David asked, confused. "They always worked in the library." James smiled, and it was the first real smile David had seen on his face. "She wanted to surprise you. Come on." David followed James through the massive house to the kitchen, which was bigger than most restaurant kitchens David had seen, and there, standing at the counter with flour on her nose and a determined expression on her face, was Lily. She was wearing an apron that was way too big for her, and there were ingredients spread out everywhere. "Mr. Collins," Lily exclaimed when she saw him. "Daddy came home early and I asked him if we could make pancakes before homework and he said yes." "You said you'd teach me, remember?" David felt his throat tighten with emotion. He looked at James, who shrugged with a slightly embarrassed smile. "I figured homework could wait an hour," James said. "And honestly, I'd like to learn too. I should know how to make my daughter's favorite food." For the next hour, David's tutoring session turned into a cooking lesson. He showed Lily and James how to mix the batter, how to know when the pan was hot enough, how to flip the pancakes without making a mess. Well, without making too much of a mess. There was definitely flour everywhere, and James accidentally flipped one pancake right onto the floor, which made Lily laugh so hard she got hiccups. But it was the sound of that laughter that made David's heart full. It was real laughter, the kind that came from deep inside, not the polite laughter of a sad little girl trying to be brave. And when David looked at James, he saw that the man had noticed it too. There were tears in James's eyes, but he was smiling. They sat at the kitchen table together, all three of them, eating slightly misshapen pancakes with syrup and butter. Lily chattered away about her day at school, about her friend who had brought a hamster for show and tell, about the new book series she was reading. James listened to every word, asking questions, genuinely engaged in his daughter's life in a way that David suspected he hadn't been in months. "These are good," James said, taking another bite. "Not as good as your mom's were, sweetheart, but pretty close." Lily nodded seriously. "Mommy always added vanilla. That was her secret ingredient, vanilla," James repeated softly. "I'd forgotten that." He looked at David. "Thank you for this. For suggesting it." "I just mentioned it," David said. "You two did all the work." After they finished eating and cleaned up the kitchen, which took almost as long as making the pancakes had, they moved to the library for actual homework time. But the mood was different now. Lighter. Lily worked through her math problems with more energy, and every so often James would peek in to check on them, not hovering but just being present. When the session ended and David was packing up his things, James walked him to the door as usual. But this time he looked different, more alive somehow. "I left work at 4:30 today," James said quietly. "First time I've done that in 6 months. My assistant nearly fell out of her chair when I told her I was leaving." "How did it feel?" David asked. "Terrifying," James admitted. "And wonderful. I kept thinking about all the things I should be doing, all the meetings I was missing, all the emails piling up. But then I got home and saw Lily's face when I walked through the door hours earlier than usual, and none of that other stuff mattered anymore." "That's good," James, really good. I've been hiding, James said, the words coming out in a rush like he'd been holding them in for too long. At work, hiding from the grief, from the memories, from the empty space where Rachel used to be. I told myself I was working hard for Lily, to secure her future, to make sure she never wanted for anything. But the truth is, I was just running away. David didn't know what to say to that, so he just listened. You know what the crazy thing is? James continued. I run a company with 3,000 employees. I make decisions that affect millions of dollars every day, but I couldn't figure out how to make pancakes with my own daughter. What kind of father does that make me? The kind who's learning, David said gently. The kind who's trying. That's all anyone can do, James. None of us have it all figured out. We just keep showing up and trying our best. James nodded slowly. Will you keep coming? I know I'm probably paying you the least amount of money you've ever been offered for tutoring, but I'll keep coming, David interrupted. As long as Lily wants me here, I'll be here. Over the next month, David watched James slowly come back to life. He started coming home earlier more often. He began joining David and Lily for the last half hour of their sessions, just sitting quietly and watching them work, or sometimes helping with the homework himself. He learned to braid Lily's hair after she mentioned she missed how her mom used to do it. He started cooking dinner with her on weekends, using recipes they found online and laughing at their mistakes. David also noticed changes in Lily. She smiled more easily. She talked about her feelings more openly. One evening, she brought out a box of photos of her mother and showed them to David, telling him stories about each picture without crying. The sadness was still there, David could see it, but it wasn't consuming her anymore. But while things were getting better for the Harrison family, David's own situation was getting worse. His landlord had raised his rent and David couldn't afford the increase. He'd been searching for a cheaper apartment, but everything he could afford was in dangerous neighborhoods or so far from the school that he'd never make it to work on time without a car. And his car was still broken, sitting in the parking lot of his apartment building like a useless hunk of metal. He'd picked up extra tutoring sessions with other students on the weekends, but it still wasn't enough. He was eating one meal a day most days, usually just rice or pasta with whatever sauce was cheapest at the store. He'd lost weight and his clothes hung loose on his frame. His shoes had holes in them that he tried to hide by walking carefully, but he never mentioned any of this to James. It wasn't James's problem, and David was too proud to ask for help. Besides, James was finally healing, finally being the father Lily needed. David wasn't going to burden him with his own struggles. One Tuesday evening, David was walking to the bus stop after his session with Lily when the sky opened up. Not just rain, but a downpour, the kind that soaked you to the bone in seconds. David didn't have an umbrella. He'd sold it at a yard sale 2 weeks ago because he needed the $5 for food. He was standing at the bus stop, shivering and dripping wet, when a car pulled up beside him. James's car. David, what are you doing? James called through the passenger window. I thought you took the car service home. I told them not to come today, David said, trying to keep his teeth from chattering. It's fine. The bus will be here soon. Get in the car, James said firmly. Come on, you'll catch pneumonia out here. David wanted to argue, but he was so cold and so tired that he didn't have the energy. He got into the car and James immediately turned up the heat. Why did you tell the car service not to come? James asked as he started driving. David trailed off. How could he explain that he felt guilty about James spending money on him? That every time he accepted help, he felt like he was taking advantage? David, what's going on? James's voice was concerned now. And please don't say nothing. I'm not blind. You've lost weight. Your shoes have holes in them. You're walking in the rain instead of taking the car I arranged for you. Talk to me. It's not your problem, David said quietly. You've made my daughter's happiness your problem. You've made my family's well-being your problem. The least you can do is let me care about yours. David was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly he started talking. He told James about the rent increase, about his broken car, about the student loans that took most of his paycheck every month, about how he'd chosen to become a teacher knowing it wouldn't pay well, but not realizing just how hard it would be, about how he sometimes wondered if he'd made the wrong choice, if he should have gone into business or tech or anything that would have paid better. But then I see kids like Lily, David said, and I remember why I do this, because someone has to care about these kids. Someone has to be there for them. And if people like me don't do it, who will? James was silent as he drove, his hands tight on the steering wheel. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. How much do you need? What? How much do you need to catch up on your bills, fix your car, get stable again? How much? James, no, David said immediately. I didn't tell you all this so you'd give me money. I know you didn't. That's exactly why I want to help. David, you've helped my family more than you know. You gave me my daughter back. You showed me how to be a father again. And you did it for $25 an hour when you could barely afford to eat. Please let me do this. I can't take charity, David said, his pride flaring up. It's not charity. James paused, thinking. Call it a bonus. For exceptional work. I give bonuses to my employees all the time. Think of it like that. I'm not your employee. Fine, then call it a gift. From a friend who cares about you. David felt his eyes sting with tears. When was the last time someone had called him a friend? When was the last time someone had cared whether he was struggling or not? I don't know what to say, David whispered. Say yes, James said simply. Let me help you the way you've helped us. They pulled up in front of David's apartment building, a rundown place in a neighborhood that made James visibly uncomfortable. David saw James looking at the bars on the windows, the graffiti on the walls, the broken streetlights. You live here? James asked, his voice filled with concern. It's what I can afford, David said defensively. James was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I have a proposal for you. Hear me out before you say no, okay? David nodded cautiously. I have a guest house on my property. It's been empty since Rachel died. She used to use it as an art studio, but now it just sits there collecting dust. It's small. Just one bedroom and a bathroom and a little kitchen, but it's fully furnished and safe. Move in there, no rent. You can save up your money, get your car fixed, pay off your debts. James, I can't. You'd actually be doing me a favor, James interrupted. Lily loves having you around. And honestly, so do I. You've become important to our family, David. Having you close by, knowing you're there, it would make us feel better, safer somehow. I don't need charity, David said again, but his voice was weaker now. And I don't need the guest house, James countered. It's just sitting empty. Why not let someone use it? Someone who's become a friend? David looked out at his apartment building, at the broken front door that didn't lock properly, at the windows of his unit, where he could see his one lamp glowing dimly because the overhead light had burned out, and he couldn't afford to replace the bulb. He thought about walking up those stairs every day, about the neighbors who screamed at each other at night, about the smell of cigarette smoke that seeped through the walls, and then he thought about the Harrison property, about the peaceful grounds and the safety and the chance to maybe finally stop struggling so hard just to survive. Okay, he said quietly, but I want to contribute something. I can help around the property, do yard work, fix things, something. James smiled. Deal. You can help me figure out how to fix the fountain. It stopped working last month and the repair guy wants a fortune to come look at it. I can do that, David said. My mom's boyfriend when I was a teenager was a handyman. He taught me some stuff. They shook hands on it and David felt something shift in his chest. Hope, maybe, or relief. Or just the simple knowledge that he wasn't alone anymore. That someone saw him struggling and cared enough to help. What David didn't know was that James had been doing research. He'd been quietly looking into David's situation, not to invade his privacy, but because he'd noticed the signs of someone barely holding on. He'd seen the weight loss, the worn clothes, the exhaustion in David's eyes, and it had reminded James of something his late wife used to say. The people who give the most are often the ones who have the least. James had been planning this for weeks, trying to figure out how to help without insulting David's pride. The guest house idea had come to him one night when he'd walked past it and remembered all the happy hours Rachel had spent there, painting and creating and dreaming. She would have loved David, James thought. She would have appreciated his kindness, his dedication, his quiet strength. As David got out of the car that evening, James called after him. David, thank you. For everything. David turned back, confused. I should be thanking you. Maybe we should both just accept that we've helped each other, James said with a smile. That's what friends do, right? David smiled back, a real smile that reached his eyes for the first time in months. Yeah, that's what friends do. As James drove away, David stood in the rain for a moment, letting it wash over him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he was drowning. He felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. He didn't realize it yet, but his life was about to change in ways he'd never imagined. And it had all started with a simple decision to stay late on a rainy evening with a little girl who needed someone to care. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest ripples. Sometimes helping someone else is actually the key to saving yourself. And sometimes the people who seem to have everything are the ones who need help the most, just in different ways than we expect. Moving into the guest house felt surreal to David. He'd packed up his entire life into 4 boxes and 2 garbage bags, which was depressing when he thought about it too hard. 28 years of living, and everything he owned fit into the trunk of James's car because his own car still sat broken in his old apartment parking lot. The guest house was small, like James had said, but to David it felt like a palace. The bedroom had a real bed with a wooden frame, not a mattress on the floor like he'd been sleeping on. The kitchen had appliances that actually worked, and the bathroom had water pressure that didn't fluctuate between scalding hot and freezing cold. There were bookshelves built into the walls, filled with art books that had belonged to Rachel. James had asked if David wanted them removed, but David said no. They made the place feel lived in, loved, like someone's dreams had existed here. The best part was the big window in the main room that looked out over the garden. David could see flowers and trees and a small pond with actual fish in it. It was so quiet here. No sirens at night. No neighbors fighting through thin walls. No constant fear that someone might break in through his door that didn't lock properly. That first night, David sat on the small couch and just breathed. Really breathed. Maybe for the first time in years. He wasn't completely relaxed, not yet. Part of him kept waiting for the catch, for the moment when this would all be taken away. But for now, he let himself enjoy it. The next morning, Lily came knocking on his door at 7 in the morning, still in her pajamas, her hair a mess. "Mr. Collins." "You're really here." "Daddy said you moved into Grammy's art house." She stopped, suddenly looking worried. "Is it okay that I call it that?" Grammy was my grandma Mommy's mom. She used to paint here before she died. David knelt down to her level. "Of course it's okay. This was a special place for your family. I'm honored to be staying here." "Do you paint?" Lily asked hopefully. "Not really. But I like art. Maybe you could show me some of your drawings sometime? I could hang them up in here, make it feel more like home." Lily's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really, you'd hang up my drawings?" "I'd be proud to." She ran off to get her sketchbook, and David smiled. This was going to be different, living so close to the family. But different in a good way, he thought. Over the next few weeks, David settled into a new routine. He'd wake up early, make breakfast in his little kitchen, and walk across the